Numbers aren't enough. The importance of capabilities and economic mobility when discussing poverty.
By Kelsey Jervis and Hannah Powell.
Poverty. What is it? Why does it occur? How should we fight it?
The unfortunate reality of poverty and the study of it is this: no one can definitively answer these questions. That being said, countless scholars, students, professors, politicians, and activists have done their best to establish an approach that will help us define and measure poverty in a practical framework to effect change. While each has brought a unique perspective and knowledge base to the conversation, adding invaluable tools toward achieving a greater understanding, no one person's ideology is sufficient on its own. By combining Sen's capabilities approach and Janti's economic mobility research, however, we can define poverty as the long-term systemic oppression of low-income individuals and their consequential lack of capabilities.
Most Americans understand poverty in terms of the OPM, the official poverty measure. Established in the mid-20th century, the OPM uses data from the 1955 Household Food Consumption Survey to establish that families of at least 3 people tend to spend roughly a third of annual income post-taxes on food. To ascertain a threshold for poverty, the OPM multiplies the price of a food plan for a family of X amount of people by 3. Thus, anyone below this threshold is considered impoverished. There are a host of problems with this method of defining poverty. First, the OPM does not account for non-discretionary expenses. That is, payments over which an individual or family has little to no control. These expenses might include transportation to school or work, healthcare, childcare, and taxes. Once these amounts are subtracted from annual income, a family that appears to be above the poverty line based on the OPM might really be well below it.
It also does not consider any benefits a family might receive from the government, such as SNAP benefits, formerly known as food stamps. Calculating necessary income using a survey from 1955 poses a problem as well. For starters, even with an adjustment for inflation every 3 years, this index has not kept up with the huge, if gradual, rise in prices in the last half century. Additionally, Americans actually spend closer to a sixth or seventh of annual income on food, which in essence invalidates the OPM entirely.
Some claim that the SPM, Supplemental Poverty Measurement, is an adequate solution to these limitations. Unlike the OPM, the SPM can accurately measure annual income by subtracting estimated non-discretionary expenses, as well as adding in-kind benefits and near-cash benefits that individuals and families receive. The threshold, or poverty line, for the SPM accounts for geographical discrepancies in areas like transportation, as well as making adjustments based on FCSE rankings, which stands for Food, Clothing, Shelter, and Utilities. But even the SPM limits the concept of poverty to income alone. What about income relative to the incomes of others? What about the education, the opportunities for advancement, the social inclusion, and so much more that the impoverished are deprived?
Amartya Sen's capabilities approach attempts to tackle these issues. According to Sen, poverty should be considered in terms of income inadequacy rather than income lowness. Even inadequacy, which Sen says is meant to illustrate minimally acceptable capabilities, is an unsatisfactory tool for understanding the scope of poverty. It raises the question, what exactly should we consider adequate? Sen believes, instead, that the definition of poverty should be centered around capabilities and functionings.
Capabilities refers to the aggregate number of options available to someone, while the functioning refers to the actual choice that is made. Or, in Sen's words, the capability of a person reflects the alternative combinations of functionings the person can achieve, and from which he or she can choose one collection. For example, imagine 2 men on the brink of starvation. One, a monk, does not eat for religious reasons, even though he could if he wished. The other starves because he cannot afford food. He has no choice in the matter. The difference in their capabilities is how we differentiate between the two in terms of poverty. The functioning, going without food, might be the same, but it is the monk's ability to choose to do this that makes him better off than the other man, who starves because he must.
Sen's definition of poverty, then, is superior to the OPM and SPM in that it demonstrates more fully the effects of living at a low income. Capabilities, Sen says, can be unequal without necessarily implying that one party is in poverty until the lack of a capability strips that party of dignity. Lacking the freedom to decide whether to eat, or the freedom to not have to work as a child, to give another example, certainly compromises one's dignity. This methodology therefore provides crucial preliminary tools for measuring poverty because it allows us to distinguish between who is impoverished and who is not. It does fall short, however, in addressing how people get stuck in poverty and to what degree. Marcus Jonti's analysis of economic mobility reveals a key component of poverty that is often overlooked: the chronic nature of it. While many defend the massive income inequality in the United States by arguing that anyone who works hard enough can climb the proverbial income ladder, Jonti's work paints a different picture. Economic mobility in America is extremely limited. Those who start in poverty often end up there. In fact, according to Jonti, 44.2% of sons who had a father in the lowest quintile of earners will also end up in the lowest quintile of earners in their own generation. Similarly, 36% of sons who had a father in the highest quintile of earners will end up there as well. Only 7.9% of sons whose fathers were in the lowest quintile will end up in the highest, and just 9.5% of sons whose fathers were in the highest will end up in the lowest.
Jonti's findings indicate that we must expand the definition of poverty beyond the existence of people who lack certain capabilities and toward one that identifies it as the system that traps these people. The statistics also provide a means to complete how we might measure poverty, giving us insight into how many people fall victim to this trap.
In other words, Sen tells us who, and Jonti tells us how much.
While fighting poverty will always be a challenging, trying task, and no two scholars are likely to ever agree completely on how best to go about it, it is in the best interest of human dignity to keep searching for answers. By joining Jonti's mobility analysis to Sen's conceptual understanding, we create a wide foundation of definition and measurement that can hopefully provide clarity and one that can give the people in power a real chance to help the people in poverty.